Thanks everyone for being here. I know a lot of the names out in the crowd, so it's great to be with you again today. I'm going to give a brief overview of the STAR program. This will be review for a lot of you, but then I'll be going into some of the details around the STAR field forms and scoring sheets and how different things were weighted and organized. And hopefully that'll respond to some of the questions that have come up a little earlier today. So I think you all know that STAR stands for Saving Tomorrow's Agriculture Resources. STAR is a free and voluntary tool. I really want to emphasize the fact that it is a tool here. So really STAR is an opportunity to work with the producer in conjunction with the consultation to identify practices that they would be open to or that would work on their farm to help improve soil health. It is a good metric of helping producers to assess where they are on their soil health journey. Completing the STAR forms, as you know, will be part of your producer consultation. And depending on the flow of your consultation, it may be helpful to walk a producer through the STAR scoring sheet first. I'll show how to do that in a second, just again to provide a full suite of the practices that may be available on their particular field or for their crop type. We also mentioned that STAR is really hopefully going to work synergistically with the research parts of the program. We're really hoping to be able to marry the economic analysis of what these practices have along with the soil health outcomes. So in 3 years and cumulatively after that, we'll be able to provide robust information on how much these management practices cost, what soil health outcomes they have in a given region to producers. So why did we choose STAR as a really foundational part of the Colorado Department of Agriculture soil health program? First, it rewards producer effort for doing the right thing. This is really important. I think we all know that outcomes are largely unpredictable and also outside the control of the producers. We saw that with the 5 soil health forming factors: climate, time, et cetera. Again, a lot of those are outside of the control of the producer. It's scientifically rigorous. We spent about a year with a diverse committee of scientists, producers, NRCS, and lots of others. Folks here on this call were involved in that, developing these forms for almost every type of production in Colorado. And we really did take this cropland production type by production type, and I'll walk through some of those. For instance, potatoes were considered very differently than wheat fields. It's flexible and adaptable. So there's lots of ways to skin the cat, or lots of tools available to the producers to improve their soil health. There are no prohibitions. For instance, it was mentioned earlier in the call about synthetic inputs, nitrogen fertilizers, or perhaps pesticides or fungicides. STAR really does not prohibit any one tool. Rather, it looks at how that tool is being used within the suite of practices on that particular field. It encourages experimentation and continual improvement. One of the things that's really wonderful about STAR for croplands is that it's field-based. So producers are encouraged to enter a lower risk situation by trying a practice on a given field, but not for their whole operation. I do want to note that grazing lands is a bit of an exception to this particular point, and we'll talk a little bit more about why grazing lands differs from croplands. It's an annual process too, so producers will hopefully see, as they accrue different practices, a continual improvement in their STAR rating. We do hope that STAR is not overly burdensome for producers or administrators. A field form should take not more than 20 to 30 minutes for a producer and a conservation district to fill out with that producer. Of course, that really depends on how well a producer knows their operation. So that might be one thing to prepare a producer for when you go into your consultation. Uh, these forms are submitted via the internet and scored by CDA. So again, that takes a lot of that burden off of you all. Finally, and I think very importantly, STAR is growing nationally, as has been mentioned. It is growing across the Midwest, and a lot of other Western states have expressed interest in adopting this program. And with all of that momentum, there really is a potential for it to evolve into a market signal. We've had some preliminary conversations with supply chain partners on this, and we're going to continue those conversations in the future. You might get asked by your producers, what are the benefits? Well, if you're in STAR Plus, they'll be receiving matching grants. They'll be receiving technical assistance, which I'll talk about in a little while. And of course, soil health benefits and the potential for market signals as well. I will note that for us to be able to really push the needle on market signals, it's important for us to have a growing amount of acres under STAR. So STAR is a 5-step process. The producer completes the field form for a given crop field in a given crop year. Points are assigned on the scoring sheet. For croplands, they really are based on the 5 soil health principles that we've gotten to talk a lot about today. Ryan will talk about how this how the STAR form does differ from grazing lands and really focuses on the decision making and monitoring for grazing lands. In both types of forms, we want to reward a producer using their universal tools for soil health, and the best universal tool that grazers have is their decision making. Forms are submitted via internet to CDA for scoring, and then the producer will receive their STAR rating and a field sign. For producers outside of STAR Plus, there will be a random verification process. CDA is developing that now. So how is STAR ratings assigned? A 1-star is a field that we say is practices similar to what 80% of fields are doing in that region, but really it's a field that hasn't begun its soil health journey. 2 stars is a really great start. It's a field that has maybe begun to use 1 or 2 practices that pertain to the soil health principles. And we move all the way up to 5 stars. We call this an ideal field. What it really means is that a producer is using multiple practices that are consistent with all 5 soil health principles. Again, I want to note that that this does not mean that the producer has to be organic. You can achieve a 5-star rating with the use of synthetic inputs, and potato producers and sugar beet growers can also be 5 stars. So we worked hard over the past year to develop 11 field forms and scoring sheets that cover hopefully all of the production types in Colorado. I think that there's at least 1 missing. The 2 that are being developed this month are orchards and vineyards. So if you all have folks that you'll be working with in that production type, just reach out to me or Ryan. And also non-alfalfa perennial hayland will be posted shortly. This is just a reminder of the STAR for individual producers that we hope you'll promote in your districts. So any questions on kind of the philosophy of STAR, the general reasons, the general framework? Okay, great. So Max has just put into the chat the Colorado Department of Agriculture Soil Health website, which is where I'm going to go right now. So I think most of you know this, but to access the STAR forms, producers will just click on this blue banner. And I think we're going to start by showing you the how a producer will fill the STAR form out. The only required field on the Google form for most producers is the email. So once they've submitted their email, read the instructions, and acknowledged the confidentiality clause, and stated that to the best of their knowledge everything is true, they can click next and proceed through the form. The one thing on the form that we ask producers in the STAR Plus program to be sure to answer if possible is to insert a longitude and latitude of the selected field. I will note that we are working on getting printable versions of the Google form. I know I can speak for Ryan and me that we have struggled quite often when we were doing field visits with the form on how to show this to producers. What I like to do, it's not a perfect solution, is simply to go to my print function, save it as a PDF, and print it out. It will end up being quite a few pages, I think 27 pages or so, but there's only 1 or 2 questions on each page. And there also may be some other issues, for instance, words getting cut off. It's not a perfect solution. Again, we are trying to rectify that. So going to the scoring sheet might be the best way for us to explore how we structured the STAR field forms and scoring sheets. This particular form is for annual grasses, grains, and legume crops. Annual grasses, of course, include corn. So this is going to get a large part of your production, including wheat, peas, corn, etc. So the first section of the form is really general information, non-scored things that will be helpful to us in the future as we take this private data and potentially aggregate it to come to some general conclusions around soil health in a given region. If you guys are having trouble seeing my screen, you can also click on the CDA Soil Health website and follow along there. The next section that really gets into the substance of the soil health principles is about irrigation and salinity sodicity management. This is actually not an issue that's present in all areas of Colorado. So here you would get a no for 2 points. If you have a yes, you get 0 points. But then again, you can make up those points that you would lack by having appropriate management practices. Soil armor takes up the next couple of sections, and you can see that we've really thought through the different types of practices that you might have to protect from wind erosion. Artificial mulch here really means this, plastic mulch. This was something that had come up in a different venue. Here is another example of a place where you can get negative points. That question came up. So if you have sloped land and you have, for the sloped land section, if you have a flat field, you get a point. But if you have a sloped field, we're going to prioritize certain types of shaping of land. So smoothing, you get a -1 because of the disturbance of the soil. The next is cover crops and living mulch. Reduced disturbance is a place where producers will pick up a lot of points. We are heavily incentivizing no type of tilling in the past couple of seasons. This particular section, you're answering for tillage over the past 2 years. We had a lot of producer feedback about how most programs do not incentivize or recognize the fact that no-till operated over a very long period of time has significant soil health benefits. And so that is something we're incentivizing here additionally. So if you've been in no-till 3 to 5 years or above, you'll get additional points there. A similar framework exists for reduced till as well. For nutrient management, we have provided a wide variety of practices that are available and ranked them according to the best science around their soil health impacts. So for instance, you can see that slow release fertilizer has you receive a 0.5, whereas compost and manure and biosolids, you will get a 1 point. No synthetic fertilizers, you will get 1 point, consistent with the soil health principles. We also cover pest control strategies here. Chemical pesticides, I know this is something that's probably on everybody's mind. 0 points are awarded for chemical pesticides, which means you're not penalized, but you're also not gaining points. But seed treatments, given the science around their effect on soil biology, you are getting a -1. Again, this won't make or break a star rating as you progress through the form, but it is a recognition of those impacts. Plant diversity is obviously an important section. And one thing I do want to note is that we are asking about families of crop types, not distinct crops. So we do provide information on crop families, both in the Google Sheet and here. But for instance, you would not say 3 families or more if you planted corn, sorghum, wheat, rye, all in a row. They have to be a different family. So it would something that would qualify for 3 families or more would be corns, beans, sugar beets, and sunflowers. And of course, continual living root is a challenge in Colorado, and we want to recognize that. So we give percentages for points for different percentages of time. And livestock integration, this was definitely a tricky principle to incorporate, but we did our best. And one of the reasons it was tricky is not everybody has the opportunity to incorporate livestock. They may not have it near their field. One thing that we are focusing on is how animals are treated with wet ground and whether folks are using stocking rates and the percentage of utilization. So one thing to note on this annual grasses, grains, and legumes scoring sheet is that we actually have a different scaling for irrigated versus dry land. Again, soil health practices and principles can be a little harder to achieve on dry land, and so we wanted to accommodate for that. There was a question about 5-star potatoes or sugar beets, both of which require some disturbance. I won't go into detail on this, but you can see that it does follow the same basic structure as the previous sheet, although we are incentivizing tillage a little bit differently, and the scaling as well as pest control strategies, plant diversity, and continual living root. And the scale is significantly different. Here, the scale is only 65 points. So it's easier for you to get to a 5-star, again, recognizing that many of these crop types are going to have to use tillage. So I'll stop there and let folks ask questions. Yeah, Vanessa.
Sorry, I always have a lot of questions. So there's the Google form that the producers fill out, with or without the conservation district staff. But then the scoring sheet, is that done entirely behind the scenes by like someone else? Or I guess I'm not sure who fills in the numbers on this sheet that we're looking at right here.
That is going to be the lucky job of Ryan and other soil health coordinators that we'll be hiring in the near future. So you all will be able to get a sense of where folks are at and how they might improve their soil health score and get ideas for different practices, but the actual scoring will be done behind the scenes.
And there's nothing subjective about that. They're 100% taking what producers answered and just transferring some numbers onto that form.
That's correct.
Okay.
And I just want to follow up on something Ryan mentioned, that a lot of work went into these, but we know they're not perfect, and we know that there are practices that producers have innovated around that we're going to want to add in the coming years. So this is kind of a first round, if you will, of what the STAR forms would look like. A lot of these practices, however, we're fairly confident in their soil health impacts.
And then just thinking through this from the producer standpoint, so when we're sitting down with them, they're going to say, what's my STAR rating? And I'm going to say, I'll get back to you in a certain amount of time when the state tells us what your score is.
There's nothing to keep you from scoring it. I guess that's the point, Vanessa, is you can, I mean, you or the producer or together or separate can sit down and score it. It's there, like I said, there's nothing subjective about it. You're just going to take, do they have a nutrient management plan? Yes or no, right? They get a point for that. And so you should be able to go through the answers and score that directly. There should not be any surprises.
Okay.
I mean, if you send something in and you're expecting 75 points and it comes back significantly different, then something wrong happened.
Okay. And then just trying to think through this. So if we have a producer who wants to sugar beet field, right? So we fill out the STAR form, answer all the sugar beet questions, and they get whatever they get, a 2. It's going to be hard in a 3-year time frame to see if they improved, because they're not going to plant sugar beets on the same field next year. So there'll be like you'll be filling out a different STAR form each year based on the rotation. So the STAR rating may go up or down for that crop, but doesn't really mean that, I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah, and we've anticipated that, which is why we're asking about the 2 years encompassing it. So you're getting a general rating for that field. What you're really like probably focusing on here is the primary crop type in the coming year. Ryan, do you want to jump in and maybe explain that less clumsily than I did? You're on mute, Ryan.
Sorry, I was responding to some stuff in the chat. What was the question?
If a producer has planted sugar beets this past year, they're not likely going to be planting sugar beets again this coming year. And so how does the STAR form assess for that?
Yeah, so we tried to make it so that the field was assessed annually on the crops that you're going to be growing, right? The one caveat to that, I guess, that I see is that could be the deep tillage, right, lasts for 2 years, but everything else should basically be on, you know, what you're doing this year and what your management practice is. So on the year that you grew sugar beets, again, like Helen has said, you're scored on it's a sliding scale, right? Because sugar beets is X, Y, and Z. I mean, look, in an ideal world, Vanessa, what I'd like to see is minimal or no till, you know, in the rest of the rotation, so that when you get back to sugar beets, or, you know, if everybody's going to have to till at some point, right? The idea that you're going to be in no till for the rest of time is just, it's not accurate, right? So when you do have to go to those deep tillage or, invasive techniques, if you've had a good rest period for the soil where aggregation can build up and strengthen and structure can form, then those disturbances have less of an impact than if you're constantly tilling multiple times every year. So it should just be, if they were in sugar beets last year, they were scored on a 65-point sliding scale according to that sugar beet form. And if they're going to be in, corn this year, then they'll use a different form and they'll be assessed based on the practices for that year's management practices. Does that help?
And the instructions, we should have clarified this, I'm sorry, that say, please complete this for activities beginning immediately after harvest in 2020 to after harvest in 2021. So we're really looking at that complete year cycle, with the exception of some of the questions that go beyond, like tillage. That will encompass that 2-year cycle.
Vanessa, did we answer that question effectively?
Yes, and I guess it's just sort of a fundamental philosophy with how STAR is set up, looking at it from year to year rather than like a fully integrated systems approach, regardless of crop. But this is how it's set up, so this is what we're going with. So
let's
got it.
let's be fair, okay? Play nice, Vanessa. This is year 0, okay? I mean, it would be really hard to play, to just step into, let's look at the last 5 or 10 years of history, right? Not saying it would be disingenuous to say that we couldn't do that, but given the fact that we're all at different levels of understanding of these different systems, right, it would be even more onerous on the producers and the conservation districts to discharge the program if we had to get into that. I'm hoping that as over the next 3 years, we all get used to the system, how it works, communication and workflows, things like that. Over time, that's exactly what we'll probably start morphing things into, is looking at, more long-term rotational things, and looking at the system as a whole as opposed to just year on year. But given where we're at, we had to kind of start somewhere. So although it's imperfect, that's kind of, yeah, you're right. That's what we're dealing with.
So we're still confused. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We fill out the field form. We send it in and Ryan fills out the score sheet.
That's correct.
All right.
However, Ryan and Vanessa have brought up really good points, that you can score the field form or the scoring sheet on your own. It's, you could just tally up the points by highlighting what the producer has chosen. So if I were sitting down with a producer, I could start with, having printed out the scoring sheet and going through question by question as they fill out the Google form. Yes, I have irrigation indication of salinity, sodicity problems. I'd highlight that, put it in a calculator, and then maybe how I manage it. And I can just add up the points that way so the producer can get a rough guess of their scoring. Again, though, in the interest of also lessening your burdens, you don't have to do that.
All right. We've got it.
So
there was a question about, should you start with the consultation form or the STAR scoring sheets, field forms and scoring sheets?
So I think this is going to be an iterative process. I would definitely start with the consultation forms to get that general sense of where they are at in their soil health journey, and then going through the the star field form and scoring sheet might add to that conversation and highlight practices that they want to or could try. So for instance, with nutrient management, they might decide, oh, well, I disc in my inputs right now. Maybe I'd like to stop doing that, or maybe I don't use split applications for fertilizers. Maybe that's a good practice for me to try. So really, again, this is why STAR is a good tool to spur conversation around the practices available to producers to try. Because there are a lot of practices on here besides cover crops and no-till.
Yeah, and I just, so what I kind of added in the chat was that, you know, I would start with the consultation forms first, with the caveat that they're familiar with the material before you get there. Right. And so if they have a chance to fill out the forms and go through the scoring sheets and stuff like that before you get there, that would be beneficial. If they could go through the consultation form as well and be thinking about the, I guess what I'm saying is, the better prepared they are for when you show up, the better. If you show up and they're cold and they haven't been exposed to any of this material, that could be a long consultation, right?
I
Because there
think
would be
it's
a
still,
lot of,
I do still think it's not a bad thing. If they haven't done their homework ahead of time, the consultation form is really structured in the way I look at it as just a beginning conversation. It gives you some really good discussion points to start. It's a starting place. And so whether or not they've gone through all the forms, you're going to get there. And it's, some of these people are people you know, some of them may be people you don't know, but at least it helps frame the discussion. And I think that's what everybody needs or would like to have, is just something to frame the discussion around. And then after you do the consultation, then you work into the field forms where this is the nuts and bolts of what you're doing. And because you've had such a good positive conversation with the initial consultation, I see it just kind of going hand in hand. If you don't mind me saying.
Just to give a real clear answer, there's two things that really need to get done for this first consultation. One is the consultation form needs to get filled out. When you turn those in, that's when you get your $2,000 per producer. And the second thing that needs to happen at this first point of contact with the producer is filling out the STAR field form. Those are the two things that need to happen in the first consultation. Hope that clears things up.
Nancy, are you good on that now?
Oh, yeah, I said yes, but I was muted.
Okay, sounds good.
So I think Ryan was going to review STAR for grazing lands if we have time.
yeah, where are we at, Max? Did we want to take a break, or did we just want to go right into it?
I think we should go right into it. This is the last section before we break out into some breakout rooms so that there's smaller forums to ask some questions.
Okay. Okay,